Evening, everyone. Thanks for coming in. We hope you're all safe and well, and welcome to the first of what is going to be a monthly slot for us with the author and paranormal investigator, Mark Egerton. I hope I said your second name right there, Mark.
You did indeed, Scott.
Excellent. Mark is the author of which he kindly gave me a copy, and it really is an excellent book, The Haunted Hunt. I'll get the title right. Yeah, I think I've got it right once in saying it. The Haunted History of Huntingdonshire, which is an excellent book, absolutely brilliant book. So tonight, what we're doing tonight is we've got 4 or 5 locations that we're going to ask Mark, featured in his book, and Mark's going to give us, the background on these locations. Any questions you've got for him, fire them in. He's been a paranormal investigator for 40 years, and he was trained by the best of the best, basically. So the guy, knows his stuff. So we get Gail and we get Sarah in so far. So thanks for coming in, Mark. I know you've had a busy day. And if you're ready, then I'll hit you with the first location. Hi, Tag. One of the stories that stuck out to me, I don't know why it was, but this story really stuck out to me, was about I'll see if I can pronounce this right, Alconbury disaster back in 1943.
Yes.
When they were loading the B-17 bomber and the bomb detonated. I really found that story interesting, but I'll let you tell it, buddy.
Yeah, well, basically, I live in East Anglia, and during the Second World War, there was air bases all over the place here. Alconbury has been, I think, an American air base, RAF Alconbury as it's called, since the World War One, but it played a huge role in World War Two. And there was an incident there on the date you mentioned in 1943, where they were loading bombs onto one of these aeroplanes, and there was an accident. They used to actually load the bombs onto the planes for these missions over Germany and mainland Europe that was under German occupation, and they would actually fuse them, sort of prime the fuses when they were airborne. But for some reason or other, they decided to, in this particular occasion, fuse them before they loaded them. And basically a bomb got dropped and it detonated and detonated several others. And the pictures in the book are quite graphic. It blew a huge crater, and there was a number of men actually killed as a result of this accident. The explosion was heard in Huntingdon itself, which is 3 to 5 miles away from Alconbury, and it was described as absolute carnage. But where the haunted aspect came in is on the anniversary of this accident, people reported hearing the sounds of a huge explosion. It's an anniversary haunting, a bit like the ferry boat inn that's in the book in the Needingworth chapter. It only happens on one day a year, which the date I forgot. It's in May, isn't it, Scott?
And, it was May the 27th.
Yes, yeah. So after this accident happened on the May the 27th, I think it was about 7:30 in the evening when the accident happened, people on the base reported hearing this sort of distant sound of an explosion and the screams of the sort of people that were injured and maimed and killed by this huge detonation. And it's hard really to explain how large the explosion is. If you look at the pictures in the book, you can see craters as big enough to fit in a B-47 aeroplane. So it gives you some idea of the blast. These were huge bombs, and obviously the one that dropped detonated a load of others. Some people were quite literally blown to bits. I think there was, off the top of my head, 19 men killed.
There was 19 killed and 21 injured. But as you said, Mark, one part of the story that struck me was some of the airmen or servicemen were in a pub in Huntingdon. And
yeah, I think some of them were in the cinema. They were watching the cinema and they heard the explosion. Huntingdon is a good sort of 3 to 5 miles away from Alconbury, and they heard the explosion and rushed back to the base and sort of helped with the rescue operation. But the people who died were killed almost instantly. Literally, there's one incident there where a guy describes the engine of a B-40, which is huge, about the size of almost a mini car, flying through the air and flying through another aeroplane and killing people that were on there. But yeah, the incident itself was quite horrific. And I think the reason that the haunting exists, or the thoughts behind it is the American Air Force covered it up. They covered a lot of this up, and the men that had actually lost their lives were not recognized. And some years later, as you'll see in the book, the actual control tower from that incident is still there. It's a listed building, and they put a memorial up to the 19 men that perished there with full military honours. But at the time, as you can imagine, it was a bit of a propaganda thing, because the last thing that they wanted the Germans to know is effectively they'd blown themselves up, and it was an accident. But the Germans would have loved to get hold of that. Yeah, look at these people we're fighting against. They can't. They're killing themselves. It's just a horrendous accident. Why the bombs were? The decision was made to actually arm the bombs before the aircraft were airborne, because a dodgy taking off could have buffeted the plane around and detonated them then. So they generally waited until they were fully airborne and stable in the air on their way to their mission in Europe, and then the bombs were armed and fused. But on this particular occasion, I don't know if it was a one-off or whether they've been doing it for some time, but this was an occasion where a bomb got dropped, and with horrific consequences.
So the thing that struck me about the story was it kind of shows the bond that these men had. Some of them weren't on the base, they were in town. They heard the blast, and their first concern was just to get back to the base to do what they could, help. And so I've read it in the descriptions that some of them give. They were looking, they were looking for their friends basically, and they were just finding legs and arms and.
Oh, it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But I think you have to remember that these men were risking their lives every day, more or less. They were getting up in the air at night and doing raids in occupied Europe and obviously Germany in the latter stages. And, it was pretty much taken that every night they went up, some of them wouldn't come home. So there's huge camaraderie, which there must have been throughout the whole war, wherever you go in the world, Japan, America, blah, blah, blah. And obviously East Anglia here was littered with air bases. And, this is where the American air bases were most prevalent. And also in the book, I don't know if you've read it yet, in the Diddington chapter, there's a large military hospital there, which had 1,000 beds. And this hospital was for, there was a very interesting ghost story there, which I've called Airman Mikey, which I learned in 1977. But this hospital was basically there for men that were coming home from these raids over Germany, and they'd been very badly injured. They'd lost a limb, they'd probably lost their sight, very badly burnt. They were never going to take part in the war again, but their injuries weren't life-threatening, or there was little chance of them perishing as a result of these injuries. And this 1,000-bed hospital, I think there was only 12 fatalities there in the whole time that it existed. When you think you've got a 1,000-bed hospital in a war zone, that's you'd expect a lot more fatalities. But these were men, and they were sort of horrendously injured, and they were nursed back to some sort of health so that they were fit enough to jump on a plane and be flown back to America. They were never going to take part in the war again. Their injuries were too severe. But these poor 19 individuals, they were literally blown to bits in a matter of seconds. The pictures in the book are quite graphic, aren't they? They show the extent of the explosion and the scale of it. And of course, the Americans wanted to hush it up because from a propaganda point of view, they'd committed a huge faux pas. There'd been an accident. They'd killed themselves. The Germans would have had a field day with it. And so the men were not. the excuse that was given was that the men weren't actually on duty, so therefore they weren't recognised. But in reality, I think it was more a case of they didn't want that sort of bad propaganda to be leaked in a war. With propaganda, obviously you're trying to win points over the enemy. So to actually say, look at these Americans, they're such dummies, they've blown themselves up. So the Americans definitely wouldn't have wanted the Germans to get hold of that sort of information. So that's believed why this sort of haunting existed. There was no signs of anything being seen. All it was an audio haunting as regards the sound of an explosion, and this reputedly by the airmen that were there in some years after, and obviously civilians that worked on the airbase. This occurred on the anniversary at the exact moment that the explosion took place. And over the years it sort of faded, and they believe that when they put up the memorial to these men, it was a form of closure. So I think I can't remember exactly when the memorial went up without checking the book. I think it was 2014. That rings a bell in my head, but I could be wrong.
It was,
yeah.
I think it was. Sorry, Mark, just to talk about airmen and Americans, I just noticed Andy, Mark, just a wee quick hello to Andy Murphy. He's in the Air Force. He just recently, him and his family, just yesterday I think, 2 days ago, just moved to America. He's doing 3 years over there with the Air Force over there. So we're glad you had a safe trip, Andy, and you and your family all arrived safe. Just we're talking about airmen in America. I just noticed Andy's name coming up. So there's nothing here between May to May, basically?
No, it's an anniversary haunting. It happens once a year on the anniversary of the accident happened. In recent years, it hasn't been reported. I mean, the airfield is no longer there. The control tower and the memorial they're listed, so they can't get rid of those. But it's actually basically an industrial site now. It's a sort of one of these industrial sites with businesses and stuff on like that. But obviously, because of its history, the old control tower from World War II is still there, and it's a listed building. And the memorial, as you'll see from the book, is right outside that control tower. There haven't been reports, but obviously, because it's an industrial estate now, there probably isn't many people around there at 7:30 on that date. So, people go to work, go home, where during when it was an active air, it would have been manned 24/7. So there would always be guards and people there. The book actually, when I wrote the book, I thought, Huntingdonshire is a fairly small place, and ghosts and the paranormal is quite a niche subject. So I thought it would just be of interest to local people. But obviously what I didn't take into account was all these American air bases. So there were people in America that remembered this incident, and, on Facebook, and I got messages and they wanted to buy the book. And because the book's so huge, it's 19 quid, just the postage and packaging to send it, because it's a big lump of a book, isn't it? So they were paying $24.99 for the book and another 20 quid on top for the postage, which is one of the reasons why I've decided to put the book. At the moment, the Kindle version has only ever been on Amazon, but I've decided to put the hard copy on there as well, so that these people in America, can just pay for the book, and if they've got Amazon Prime or whatever, they won't be charged another 20 quid for the postage, because it's a fair old lump of a book to send to America, as you can see in your hand there.
I'll try, and I've never done this before, but we'll try. As you can see, it's loaded with pictures for every story. So it gives you a full kind of insight into the whole kind of story.
I don't know if you've got any there, Andy, of the Alconbury. If you've got the ones of the black and white ones of the actual explosion, I don't know whether they'll come through on the thing, but you can see the scale of it. I've got probably about 20 images. I put 2 or 3 in the book. You'll find it at the start of the book, obviously, because it's Alconbury and the book's written in
Yeah.
alphabetical order. But
Just while I'm looking for this, I've got a question for you, Mark,
yes,
from Craig. I'll just pop it up for you. There you go.
yeah. How rare are residual audio recordings and explosions compared to residual voice recordings? Well, I think really you have to. That's a difficult question to answer because you have to analyze of these various recordings that exist throughout the world, how genuine they are. You know, there's a lot of thought within the paranormal world that digital devices that we record on nowadays are capable of picking up things like radio signals from mobile telephones, radio signals from taxi cabs, emergency services vehicles. So you've really got to, you'll find that most, I'm not a great, I used to be quite a fan of the EMF meters when they first were used 20, 25 years ago. But we're now living in a world where you have Wi-Fi everywhere. You have signals bouncing around everywhere. And all of these items like REM pods and ghost hunting equipment, they all have one thing in common. They have electronic receivers. So they will pick up signals. If you stick your mobile phone next to a REM pod and you dial your home number, you'll see the thing goes mad because it's picking up those electrical signals. So I think first of all, you have to be very sure that what you're picking up is actually paranormal. There are some really good examples of it. Such I remember there's one actually mentioned in my book, Scott, in the God Manchester chapter. This was a guy, he's dead now, God bless him, a guy called Billy Woodham, who was quite a well-known paranormal investigator from Cambridge. And he recorded on the old cassette recorders. Remember the days when we used to tape Radio 1 and tape all the one of those old cassette recorders. He taped about 4 minutes in a pub called the Black Bull. Yeah, you know, stopping it before the DJ speaks and all that. That sort of.
I vaguely remember. I vaguely remember those days. That was just a puppy.
Well, that's basically analog. I'm 60 years old, so I remember doing that very well. But he got about 4 minutes, which he'd recorded of in a pub called the Black Bull in God Manchester, which has got a long haunted history and features in the book. And Billy actually played me a tape that was, I think it was something like 3 minutes, 57 seconds or something like that. And he had something, you know, the traditional knock once for yes and twice for no. He was in a wood paneled room, and you know, the tape recording was intelligent feedback he was getting. I could only surmise that he either had a very intelligent rat behind these wood panels or some creature that was responding intelligently. But every time he asked a question and asked for one rap for yes and two raps for no, he received one, and that went on for 4 minutes. So I think you can probably discount the fact that that may have been, you know, an explainable phenomena, such as, I don't know, an animal behind there bumping against the paneling and making a sound. The fact that it went on and it answered on demand for 4 minutes, I think that's pretty conclusive. And I would say that now with the, you know, the electronic ghost hunting equipment that's around, if you are communicating with something and it's lighting your device up on demand for more than a minute, then I think we can probably discount that it might be a rogue taxi cab signal or a rogue text message. But do remember that even if you're in a building and you've got all your mobile phones and the Wi-Fi in that building turned off, if somebody is in the building next door to you on the left and they're sending a text message to somebody next door to them on the right, that signal's likely to pass through the building you're in. So a random flash of a REM pod or an EMF meter is not, in my opinion, conclusive evidence of paranormal activity. You really want something that's lasting at least a minute and is answering on demand. You know, you can ask away questions and not get an answer, and then suddenly you get a response and people actually say, oh, you know, it's responding. And you have to remember, well, actually, you know, for the last 2 minutes before that, it wasn't. So this response, was it just one-off rogue signal? So do make sure that if you are communicating with something, and satisfy yourself that it's doing it consistently. Because if it isn't, it could just be a simple text message, taxi cab. Um, we all carry mobile phones these days, so we've got electronic signals bouncing about, and all of these modern ghost hunting equipment, including the good old EMF meter, have got electronic receivers in, so they will pick up signals. So much the same as if you take an EMF meter and you put it against an electrical junction box in a house, it will give off natural EMF, and the EMF meter will spark up. The same applies if you're in a room and there's people in there with you and they've got their mobile phones turned on, and these mobile phones are receiving Facebook messages, text messages, or whatever. I have even actually seen evidence of a lot of people think, well, if you put your mobile phone onto aeroplane mode, it's then not capable of emitting signals or receiving them. Well, I've seen some evidence by holding a mobile phone on aeroplane mode close to a device like an EMF meter or a REM pod, where a signal has emerged. Now, it could possibly not be the mobile phone, and it is a rogue signal coming from another mobile phone which is not on aeroplane mode. But I would say that with an investigation, if you can, make sure that all your mobile devices are turned off. And if you're in a built-up area, be aware that the buildings either side of you, or above you, or below, if you're talking of a flat or something like that, there are going to be people there with mobile phones and things that could impact your devices.
Exactly. I'll get two questions for you to come up, Mark, and a comment, but I'll try and show you this picture. But I don't know if you can see it. That's a picture of the crater.
Yeah, you can see there's just the four men at the back. You can see that they're men at the back of the crater. So, the size of the crater is huge. And, that blew pieces of aeroplane all over this airfield. And it wasn't just one bomb. The one bomb detonated other bombs too. And these bombs themselves were huge, much, much bigger than, about the size of a small car, these bombs were.
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine the amount of explosives they had in them.
Again, I have two questions for you, and then we'll move on to the next location in your book. Sarah's asking, what was the inspiration behind the book?
Well, the inspiration behind the book was that I first had a paranormal experience in 1976 when I was 15, and it happened not far from where I am now, less than 2 miles, and it happened in broad daylight. And I went home and told my parents, and my parents basically laughed at me and said, "Don't be so stupid." And it just so happened that my mother had a sister called Marilyn, who was married to a guy called Trevor Ken Ward, I should say, rather than Wood. And Trevor was a member of the Ghost Club. And my mother told Marilyn this experience I'd had, and laughed and joked about it. And Trevor and Marilyn happened to be visiting. They lived at Verwood in Bournemouth, so some distance away. But they happened to be visiting her mother the following week. And Trevor sat me down and interviewed me. He was used to interviewing people. He was a member of the Ghost Club, and he'd been a member for 25 plus years. And his cousin was Peter Underwood. And so, I was very fortunate. The Ghost Club back then, we're talking, as I said, in the mid-70s, was still quite a closed shop. There weren't many women that were a part of it. Initially, the Ghost Club is the oldest cyclical research organisation in the world. It started around the early 1850s. It was formally founded in 1862 in Trinity College, Cambridge, which is about 18 miles from where I sit at the moment. And it was basically university dons and professors who'd sort of caught on to spiritualism that had come over from the US. And the question is there life after death? And obviously on the back of 2 world wars, there was a lot of people who had lost loved ones who were desperate to know whether they could still communicate with that person. So, in later years, this was in the Victorian times that spiritualism first emerged. and you know, that they were scientific men, so the questions were asked. And I remember quite specifically telling the story to my Uncle Trevor in 1976, and he said, "When you're my age, boy, science will have answers for this." Well, I'm older than he was now. I'm 60, and you know, many of these questions still exist.
All not been answered.
Yeah, I saw that apparition in 1976, apparition of a monk in broad daylight, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Saw it for possibly 3 to 5 seconds maximum. Know that I wasn't drunk, know that I wasn't mentally ill. And then when I told my friend whose house it was, he actually verified that not the 16th century farmhouse I was in, but before that, in the sort of 12th century, there had been a monastic farm there. And his family had experiences, strange paranormal experiences. They hadn't actually seen a monk as I had. But even till this day, David still farms the land, and they plough up the clay pipes that these monks would have been smoking. Now, this was a time before tobacco was in this country, so they would have been smoking opium or cannabis. We're in East Anglia, which is an area known as the Fens, very, very flat, very, very fertile. And around that time, the 11th century, it would have, most of it would have been underwater. Certainly, the abbey that owned this farm wasn't part of the UK mainland. It was about a mile away. It's a place called Ramsey Abbey. And in the book, Scott, I don't know if you've read it yet, but the Ramsey Rural Museum appears.
You're right.
Yeah, which is a really spooky place. And yeah, these clay pipes appeared, and David, my friend, went on to tell me various experiences that he and his family had. At the time I was 15 years old, I knew absolutely nothing about the fact that it was a very old farm building, 16th century, but the monastic farm would have been round about the 12th century. So there were definitely monks there. They would walk from the nearby Ramsey Abbey to farm there. And as I said, to this day, David still, when he ploughs the fields, ploughs up these clay pipes that these monks would have been smoking. So, so yeah, that's quite an interesting story. And anyway, that intrigued me so much, I wanted to get involved with the paranormal. And I was 15, so my uncle said, "No way can you get involved with this till you're 18. I will allow you to do a bit of research for me," which there was no internet around in 1976. So it literally meant going to libraries around the country and researching findings from paranormal investigations to see if what had been reported at these investigations could be verified. There is a general thought that it's not a good idea to, if you're investigating a haunted building, not to actually do research into it, because if you know that it's supposed to have a haunted monk, a ghostly monk, then the power of suggestion means that you'll see a ghostly monk. Peter Underwood actually taught me that no, you should always research, because you might get something on the investigation that's fairly insignificant, and had you not researched, you would have ignored it. But the fact that you've researched, you realize it is significant. So he said that, you know, if you do get to a situation where people think they're seeing monks because they know that there's a history of monks being seen, if you actually break down the evidence that you've got and analyze it and slowly dismiss it, what can't possibly be true or isn't right, what you're actually left with is the truth, or possibly the truth. And this was very much on the Ghost Club had some, they weren't only university professors and dons, there was also some very famous celebrities, people like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes. And if you're not familiar with the Holmes books, that's exactly how he solves his cases. So a criminal investigator and a paranormal investigator do the same thing. I'm not a lover of the term ghost hunter, because in 40 odd years, I've only ever seen one ghost or one apparition. What I have experienced most of all has been what we would deem poltergeist activity. I have experienced things moving by themselves, and I've been with other people at the same time and they've experienced it too, which sort of poo-poos the idea that my mind has played a trick on me or the light has played a trick on me. I've actually, in 2017, I was in one particular place where we witnessed a small ball do a complete circle about the size of a human head. And there was 4 of us there, and we were no more than 2 feet away from this ball. There was no chairs in the room. The ball was on the floor. So we were actually laying on our bellies and calling out and saying, you know, is there any astral beings, any spirit people in the room? Can you show us that you're here by moving the ball? And true enough, this ball did a circle about the size of a human head. Now, obviously, it wasn't on a slope. Otherwise, it would have rolled down the slope. It did a circle. 4 of us all witnessed it. I'm not saying that it was definitely caused by the spirit, soul, ghost of somebody that had expired. It could be that we moved that ball ourselves by telekinesis, the power of our mind. That's just as implausible as the ghost of a dead person, in my opinion. But it is possible. It was definitely paranormal. I've no doubt of that, because I could come up with no other logical explanation. But I think it's important to remember that if you witness poltergeist activity, I mean, for instance, in famous poltergeist cases like the Enfield haunting, where you've got extreme poltergeist activity, you've got chairs and large items moving. I've not experienced that. I've experienced fairly small items moving. I think the biggest thing I've seen move by itself are I've seen pint tankards move. I've seen a piece of wood move, probably 2 foot long, probably the thickness of a cricket bat handle. I've seen a piece of wood move by itself. So I think that the sort of lesser sized items, what you see with the most people, when they talk poltergeist, they automatically think Enfield haunting, and they envisage tables and chairs and huge objects flying around, people getting pelted with things. I've never had anything thrown at me either, which is something that is often reported in poltergeist cases. But like the Enfield case and many other poltergeist cases, there are evidence of young females mostly being present that are going through puberty, and therefore the chemicals in their bodies are all changing. And a lot of people do believe that these changes probably allow us to do things with our mind that we don't yet understand, i.e. make something move. We all wanted that ball to move. There was 4 of us laying no more than 2 foot from it. So it is possible that it was our minds that caused that to move, rather than the spirit, soul, ghost, whatever you want to call it, of somebody that had expired and was dead. Although we was in an operating theatre where it'd been an operating theatre for the best part, I think, of 70 years. So there would have been literally hundreds of people died in that room on that operating table. And so, yeah, I think it's important to remember that when I go out and people say, oh, you know, we did a paranormal investigation, it was absolutely brilliant, we had all this activity, I say to them, did you see any ghosts? And 99.9% of the time the answer is no. What they actually describe that they witnessed has been poltergeist activity, either unexplainable noises on demand or things moving like I explained. They haven't actually seen ghosts. So I think that poltergeist activity is a lot more common than people think, but people often dismiss it as just one of those things because it's fairly insignificant. You know, a glass moves 3 inches along a bar and they say, oh, you know, probably there was a minor earthquake at that moment which caused it. I've actually looked up the sort of Geiger ratings online where I've witnessed it to see if there has been an earthquake. There was a lot of talk as well about water traveling underground at pace that can cause a house to vibrate and shake, and things like pictures to come off the wall. I think if you read in the Buckton chapter, there's a story called 4 to 6 Lux Lane. I explain there how, you know, there are other explanations for poltergeist activity other than what we deem as ghosts or spirits. There are other possible explanations put forward, which are perfectly logical, like an earthquake. If you have an earthquake, obviously, picture on the wall will move.
Things are
Your experience it's an earthquake, so you can explain it. But you know, you have to analyze the activity and think what could have possibly caused it naturally. And once you've dismissed that and dismissed everything else, what you're left with, if it's unexplainable, then it falls into the category of paranormal. You know, paranormal isn't just ghosts and spirits, it's UFOs, telekinesis, as I explained, the power of the mind. I do know, because I spoke to an extremely experienced senior psychological consultant, that half of our brain, we don't know what it does, what it's for, what it's capable of.
That before that we only like half the brain.
Yeah,
I've heard that before.
Yeah, that's a true fact. So we mustn't just jump into the conclusion that it's a ghost, because we must explore all other possibilities. Only when you've explored them and dismissed them as not possible can you actually say, well, actually, I think what we've got here is something that's paranormal.
Yeah. I'm going to pop some comments up, Mark, just to quick read to them. And I've got a question from Steve. I was out with Steve the other night. He's a really nice guy. So I'll pop his comments up first, and then Steve will ask Mark your question, buddy. Andy Murphy, as I say, he's in the Air Force. He just went to America. He's RAF Lima, his residential. Residual.
Yeah.
How did I get residential? Does he walk away from that airplane? I think there's Laura's, even in today's society, the majority of people still make out paranormal experiences that individuals have are not real. Even now, if you speak about paranormal experiences, people still look at you if you've lost the plot, which is true,
I actually went round, Scott, this is a true story. When I was doing this as a youngster, I was obviously less confident then. I didn't tell people what I did. I played football in a side. I played football at a football club from 1983 to 2005. And I never mentioned to anybody there that they sometimes said to me, oh, why are you not coming out tonight with us drinking? And it was because I was going on a paranormal investigation, and I'd say, oh, we've got a family event or something. Because the majority, you know what footballers are like in the dressing room, the majorities would look at you and it was almost, you could see them visualizing the words nutter tattooed on your forehead.
Exactly. They think not a dumb view, but they think there's something wrong up there.
Yeah. I think, to be fair, it is one of those things that unless you've actually, even if you've got a best friend who you would trust with your life, who comes out and says to you, I've just seen a ghost, you're immediately thinking, what have you been drinking? Are you taking tablets? Are you very tired? You don't, and you trust them with your life. It's one of those things that unless you've actually experienced it yourself, I can get why people, they're a bit sort of pessimistic or they don't believe in it, and I get that, and so I don't try ever. And I think if you've read my book, you'll see that I make a point of not actually ramming it down people's throats that ghosts exist. I think that's down to individuals to make up their own mind.
Spot on. It is up to we can tell people what we think, what we believe, what we've seen, but it's down to the individual to, as you say, to make up their own mind. Steve's asked a question. I think that's been there for a wee while. So we're talking about, we were saying with the EMF meters, etc. How does that work in a building with no power source?
I've witnessed this before. I've actually gone and done investigations in buildings where they're actually in ruins, where there is no power source at all. There is no electricity. There is no running water. There is no toilets. I can think of a place where that happened before, where I've experienced activity and I've experienced devices going off and electronic devices. You have to be, first of all, sure that people haven't got a mobile device, because a mobile device will emit electronic signals. Well, it's the same as walking around. A lot of paranormal organisations, we do it ourselves occasionally. We'll split into two teams. We've got walkie-talkie. Well, if you transmit on that walkie-talkie, you're sending an electronic signal. If you've got something like a REM pod or that in the room, you just try it. If you stand with a walkie-talkie with a REM pod in front of you, press send on the walkie-talkie and start speaking, that REM pod will go berserk. Now, there's no mobile phones on in the building, but even if you remember that, if I'm in a building A and I'm sending a text message to building C, then building B in the middle, that signal is likely to pass through. So, you can pick up random signals. What I'm saying is, if you're in a city in particular, you've got emergency services, you've got everybody, probably, although the building you're in is completely empty, and no power sources at all, no mobile phones in it or anything, there are, outside signals. I mean, we get signals from the moon. These are electronic signals. And if you've got a device that's got an electronic receiver in, as the name suggests, it's going to receive electronic signals. So I would say to people to be very wary if you receive a random signal of automatically jumping on it's paranormal, we've got a reply. You may have got a response to a question on demand, but that could be coincidence. If you are consistently getting responses on demand, then obviously the longer that goes on, the more credible it becomes as regards being paranormal. But certainly, if I'm in a building and my EMF meter peaks just once, I might say, oh, thanks for that. Is there any spirit people in the building? Could you do that for me again, please, now? But I'll be wanting to get evidence that something is there, and I'll be expecting it to show me that evidence repeatedly. If it doesn't, then it's basically non-conclusive. And if it's inconclusive, you can't really regard it as definitely paranormal. So I see so many people, I mean, the paranormal is what you make of it. Some people go and do paranormal investigations because they love it and it's fun, and they're quite happy to have their REM pods and everything set up in a building and then broadcast it Facebook Live. Well, you've got a phone that's streaming signals there through 3G, 5G or whatever. You've got a piece of kit in the room with you that's got an electronic receiver in. So if that thing suddenly starts bleeping into life, there's a strong possibility that it's possibly picking up a signal from you streaming live from your phone, from Facebook. So, I see people getting quite excited about it, and I'm thinking, well, really what you should be doing is asking it to respond exactly on demand, and you're trying to get confirmation that there's something intelligent that is actually providing you these signals, rather than a random signal that's coming from either your mobile phone, somebody sending a text message next door, or taxi cab passing by radioing into their control that they've got a fare to pick up or whatever. So I think you need to be a little bit careful, simply because in the last 20 years, Wi-Fi, probably more than 20, Wi-Fi in particular, has meant that we're sending electronic signals without an electronic power source in a building. You can be in a completely empty building with your mobile phone. And with 3G and 5G, you can browse Facebook or whatever. Well, there's signals being exchanged. So if you've got devices in that building that will pick up electronic signals, I think it's fair to say that you've got to be, very conscious that what you're getting is truly paranormal and not just a rogue signal that's being picked up.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's just common sense. But a lot of people, they assume that these. Another thing as well with these electronic pieces of kit, I went to a meeting before the COVID lockdown with the Society for Paranormal Research, the SPR, and the Ghost Club, of which I'm a member. They do sometimes have their meetings together, and they exchange ideas and talk about what's going on in the paranormal world. I went to a meeting where they actually dismiss now video or photographic evidence, because they're saying that with CGI and with Photoshop, you can create an image which looks for all the world like something paranormal, but unless you've got proof that that image definitely wasn't created falsely like that, you can't just accept that it's a genuine photo. And it's the same with CGI. I mean, you watch some of these video games now. You see them advertised on TV, and it's a job to tell whether they're a film or whether they're an animated video character you're seeing. It's so realistic. Yeah. So you know, it's best to err on the side of caution. And once you've exhausted every possibility as to what could logically cause what you've experienced, what you're left with then is probably the truth, and that may well be paranormal. The incident with the ball doing the circle in the operating theatre, that happened at Peterborough Museum. It's a museum now. It was for about 70 years a private house that a guy called Thomas Cook, not the Thomas Cook of the travel company, who are also based in Peterborough, but this very wealthy man called Thomas Cook. The city didn't have a hospital, so he had this huge manor house, and he said, look, take this and use it as a hospital. And it was used by the city for about 70 years. So that operating theatre had been in operation for the best part of 70 years. And people would have no doubt died on that operating table in the centre of that room where we had that ball. But, you know, there is still the possibility that we moved that ball ourselves with our mind. Still paranormal, because we don't know how we do that or whether indeed we can do it. It may well have been the spirit of somebody that's expired. We don't know. What I can say, fairly 99.9% certain, was that what I experienced there and what the three other people with me experienced was paranormal, because we couldn't come up with an explanation. But I wouldn't definitely say, well, 100% it was caused by somebody that was dead and their residual spirit or energy. I get a little bit hung up as well with the word residual, because if you look it up in a dictionary, it means from the past. So if you're saying a ghost or a spirit exists from somebody who has died previously, everything paranormal is residual. If you actually look at the word residual by its definition. Residual, if you look it up in a dictionary, I think I did this many years ago because I didn't know what it meant. And I looked it up and it says from the past is what residual means. So yeah, it's an energy force that's come from the past. So what's the difference? All paranormal, if it's genuinely paranormal, all of it must be residual, because it's come from somebody that has probably died or expired and is no longer with us. So that's something that just is a minor little thing. I think the word was brought to life by Most Haunted. Derek Acora in particular used that word. But if you actually look up the meaning in a dictionary, I think the definition is from the past. So everything that is paranormal, if it is the spirits of people that have died, is residual.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I want to move on to the next location. Another interest. Well, all your bits in your book are about the True Blue Cottage.
Yeah. The True Blue Cottage is a really interesting.
Newton's Court.
Yes. This is in the centre of Huntingdon, off the High Street, and it dates back to the old days of the old coaching inns, the Coaches and Horses. Now, there was a coaching inn on the High Street in Huntingdon that I think it's now a building society, a modern building society. But the back end of this building is an old cottage called the True Blue Cottage. And there was a very interesting story that I think came out in the newspapers in about the 70s, where a family moved into the house and the mother was quite psychically gifted. And she started picking up this man. And sometimes she would see him and she could describe him quite vividly. He was quite a small man. He walked with a slight stoop. He had a sort of ferret-like face, a sort of not a full face, very sort of pointed. He walked, he seemed to shake as if he was shaking. But the most noticeable thing about him was he had a withered arm that hung at his side at a very strange angle. And she said that sometimes she was aware of this man, sometimes she was aware of pipe tobacco that he smoked. It was very particularly pungent. And anyway, her family moved into this house, very old listed cottage, and had all this activity. I was able to interview the daughter there, and she told me a lot of the things that she experienced, and her sister. And what really brought the story to the fore was, this woman, who the mother in the house, her experiences happened frequently, and she always described this man in such great detail. And the story got published in a local newspaper, and
Yep.
somebody actually came forward and said, I know who that man is. It's my father. And it turns out that this woman actually lived in the property years before. Her father was exactly as this woman described. He smoked a pipe with particularly pungent tobacco, and he'd had palsy or something. So he had a withered arm. And he also suffered from MS, I believe, and had a slight shake. So all the things that this mother uh, described that she was picking up in this house were, in fact, could be evidenced by this woman who had lived there. I can remember her Christian name was Alma. I wrote this book 4 years ago, remember? So obviously I'm very familiar with the stories in it. But, finer details like specific names and pinpoint dates, I can remember some of them. But I know I have to reference the book from time to time. It's 108,000 words in there. So,
It's a lot. It's a lot of work.
yeah.
Mm.
So anyway,
Her
this
name was
story,
Her name was Alma.
yeah, in the book, you'll see the newspaper article. I think it was from 1976 or 78, where it appeared, where it's saying, our ghost is your dad. And they had the woman in the house whose father it was. And she confirmed, and they actually found a pipe. The house is very, very old. And the daughter, who was very small when she moved in, I think she explained her first experience was her mum was carrying her where her head's on the shoulders, and they lived upstairs in this property. The downstairs was her father's workshop, and the bathroom was downstairs. And she remembers, her earliest memory was being at the top of these stairs, and in her mother's arms, looking over her mother's shoulder down the stairs, and two heads popped round
Yeah.
the sort of court. It was a sort of walk-in stairs. You walked in, and then you turned and you walked up the stairs. And sort of where you walk in, two white heads popped there. And she said what she remembered was how white they were. And in later years, when she got about 10, 12, she realized that some of the stuff going on in the house wasn't natural. And one of the things she hated as a child was having to go to the toilet, because it meant she had to go downstairs and the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
family lived upstairs. And she went down in the night one evening, about 10 o'clock, I think, to go to the toilet. And she happened to glance in her father's workshop, and she saw the two men in there. And she saw this time not just their heads, their whole body. And they were all white, really sort of covered white from head to toe. And she told her mother, and they did some research, and they believe it was a baker's at one time.
Yeah.
So what they thought was perhaps this was flour covering these men. If you work in a bakery, anyone who's worked in that environment will know that if you're baking bread, the flour is a powder, and it coats your skin and your hair. And
Mm-hmm.
she believed that that's what she was seeing. She saw things come through the wall, figures come through the wall. Her mother had several experiences that actually made her not sleep with she wouldn't sleep with the light off. And we went into this building with really high hopes and did a paranormal investigation, which is listed in the booklet. And basically nothing happened. We had a little bit of EMF reading, which could have quite easily been what I described earlier as a rogue text message or a radio cab, taxi cab signal or something. It was just one off. But apart from that, there was absolutely nothing. And you've got this
Mm-hmm.
fantastic story and all this haunted history of not only the woman who was experiencing this man, but the family that came after her. They'd been in there 7 years. It was a single mother, basically, who was living there at the time we investigated. And she got three daughters. And coins would be taken off. She used to leave coins on the windowsill and they'd disappear. And she'd think, oh, my kids had nicked them and gone and bought some sweets. And then 2 weeks later, the coins would turn up back again on the
Mm-hmm.
shelf. So there was all sorts of what I would describe as poltergeist activity, but there was actually things seen. This lady in the book Carol, her name is. There's a picture of her in the book, and I interviewed her at length, and she said that when she reached the age of 16, she didn't see anything else. I think she lived there until she left home at about 19, but up to the age of 16, or if you like, sort of adulthood, which sort of leans a little bit towards people saying that children and spirits, the children are more susceptible to be able to see and appreciate spirits than people who get older. They say that if you get a young child and you tell it a fairy story, it will believe it. The child will believe it because their reasoning isn't the same as an adult. So when we become an adult and we see a strange shape or figure, we will come up with a logical explanation. Oh, it was a shadow from the light or something. And so we tend to dismiss things. So again, if you saw a glass move on a bar and it moved 3 or 4 inches, you might say, oh, I imagined that. If it flew across the room, as in the Enfield haunting, the sort of famous poltergeist haunting, you would say, I definitely didn't imagine that. But I think poltergeist activity is a lot more common than people actually give it credit for, and we often dismiss it.
That's the thing. I know see about that things happened to this girl between the ages of 11 to 14.
Yes.
And
yes.
things were happening. And as you said earlier on, puberty and what have you as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, a girl at 11, she's starting to change in that kind of way. So could that be related to, obviously her age is related to the poltergeist activity?
I think that there are plenty of evidence of cases of poltergeist activity where there seems to be an adolescent person in the house. It's almost, but there has been others. There's the poltergeist story in my book, in the Buckton chapter. I think it's called 4 to 6 Lux Lane. The only person living in that house is a very old lady. Yet the poltergeist activity borders on the extreme Enfield haunting. And but there was no young children there at that time, so that sort of says no, it's not always associated, but there is certainly enough evidence of what I would call extreme poltergeist activity when there is a young adolescent, particularly female, around, to suggest that they either there might be chemical changes in their body that give them the ability to make things move, or that these changes in their body attract spirits or poltergeists. There is enough evidence to suggest that young people either are responsible or are responsible in that they attract poltergeists. Poltergeist, the word poltergeist is German. The very first poltergeist case ever written down occurred in Germany. Hence the German word poltergeist, noisy spirit. It means noisy ghost, loosely translated. That's what it means. So I would say that I've witnessed one apparition in 40 odd years. I have been on investigations where other people that I know and who I trust have seen apparitions, and I know them well enough to trust them. And there have been occasions. There was one at the Ramsey Rural Museum. After I'd written my book, I was invited there by a paranormal group from Bedford, and I was in a particular room with my back to a door, with another gentleman who had his back to the door, and 2 women saw an apparition there. Now, one of the women, the way she reacted, I genuinely believe that she saw something. If not, she was a bloody good actress, because it terrified her. It really frightened her. And she actually drew, and the other woman had seen it too. So there was 2 witnesses. So in that particular instance, I was in the room, I was present, I had my back to it myself, as did this other man. He was the partner of this woman who saw it. Her behaviour on seeing it was extreme fear. And prior to this, she'd actually been boasting about her experience in the paranormal, and how she'd done Ouija boards, she'd witnessed all sorts of things. Her grandmother had taught her. Nothing ever fazed her. Well, that did. And her reaction wasn't in keeping with the person who she'd explained that she was earlier. It really frightened her. fact that this other woman acknowledged it and said that she saw it too, and they actually sat down together and drew a picture of what they saw, which I can, by the way, send to you. I can email that to you if you'd like to. Yeah, she explained. We, in the book, in this same venue, we have captured what I believe to be a ghost. It's not a great picture because it was taken with a camera that wasn't night vision and it didn't have a flash, and we could see absolutely nothing with our eyes. But when we got this photograph, we'd taken a photograph of the same area with the lights on not 30 minutes before. There was nothing in that area that could have made the shape that we've captured on the photograph. And so what she drew is very, very similar to what we've captured. But she's actually drawn it as if it had a hole through it. And she said there was a hole in it and light was emitting through it. It was like a light was shining through it, if you say. That's how they both explained it. It's just a jotting drawing, but I'm quite happy. I've got it on my PC. I'm quite happy to.
If you could send it to me, buddy, that'd be great. Laura was saying, 2 seconds, apologies, went to my aunt's engagement ring. Laura's part of our team. Her aunt's engagement ring went missing. I might get this wrong, Laura, so if I have, don't shoot me. It went missing, and I think it was a couple of weeks later it turned back up again. They didn't have any explanation for it.
Yeah, I've witnessed that. Even in my own house here where I sit now, the house is supposed to be haunted. There has been an apparition of a man seen twice. I've lived here, or my family have lived here. My father built this house, and we know this house's history, but we believe that whatever is here comes and goes. It's fairly playful, and it relates to the property that was built here before this house. There was a line of about 4 farm workers' cottages with thatched roofs, and what we've seen appears to be a farmyard yokel. I've never seen it. My mother saw it round about in the early 60s, 64, 65, soon after we moved in. And about, I think, 10, 15 years later, we had a painter and decorator in the house, and we have a dining room that's got open plan stairs, and he saw this figure at the top of the stairs and thought my mum was upstairs with a man. She was actually in the living room, and he called out to her, and she said, "What do you want, Mick?" from the living room. And he said, "I thought you was upstairs. I've just seen a man at the top of your stairs." And then he described what he saw, and it tallied with what my mother had seen 10, 15 years earlier. But they're the only 2 sightings that have happened. I've lived here. There's some explanations this was all kept from me as a child. I was 3 years old when we moved in here. I used to sit in the bath. I used to have a bath Sunday night ready for school, and I would hear what I thought was my mum coming up the stairs to wash my hair. I was probably a child, 6, 8 years old. And if I ever said anything to my parents, they told me this in later life. They used to tell me it was the immersion heater filling up with water. No, it wasn't me. I wasn't coming up the stairs. It was just probably the immersion heater filling up with water. Now, as an adult, the sound of an immersion heater filling up with water sounds absolutely nothing. But because you're a child, you believe what your parents tell you. And so I just accepted it. And it was only really when I was 14, 15 that I started to experience a few things in this house that I realised didn't have a natural, logical explanation. And my mother got so flippant with this ghost spirit. She nicknamed him Fred, and things would disappear and then they would reappear 2 to 3 weeks apart. And sometimes she would actually say, "Have you took this, Fred? We need this. Now bring it back." And lo and behold, in the next day or 2, it would turn up, and it would turn up in the most obvious places where you couldn't. We had one instance, I think, where something turned up on top of the telly, and we'd sat there watching the telly for 2 or 3 weeks. If it had been there all the time, we couldn't have missed it. But my parents came home from work, and I think it was an item of clothing. It was there sort of across the top of the TV. And no one had been at home. I'd been at school. My parents had been at work. There was nobody in the house. And it had just turned up after being missing for 3 or 4 weeks on top of our TV. I had an experience which I've put in the book, which happened concerning some parsley, which I'd picked from the garden, and that went missing. And it turned up about 3 weeks later, all blackened and charred under our cupboard under the stairs. And my grandmother, because my parents both worked, my grandmother used to come every Wednesday and clean the house for my mum. My mum paid her, like having a cleaner. And she always went under the stairs every Wednesday and got the hoover out and hoovered through. And the sort of parsley went missing week 1. And so she'd hoovered week 2, she'd hoovered week 3. And it was week 4 that she opened the door of the cupboard, and in front of the hoover was this pyramid of blackened parsley, which I'd picked fresh to go with some trout that my mother had got out of the freezer. And this parsley had just disappeared. Now, I think that my mother knew exactly what had happened, but because I was quite young, 14, 15, she didn't want to frighten me. So she sort of dismissed it and didn't make a big scene of it. She first of all accused me of not actually getting the parsley. And I pointed to the kitchen sink and said, look, there's a pair of scissors there I cut it with. It's still got the milky sap on it from where I cut this parsley. So I sort of realised around about the time when I had my paranormal experience that there was some stuff going on in this house. And looking back at it now, I sort of wondered to myself, at that age, I was an adolescent, 15, 16-year-old. Was I some way attracting that activity, or was I responsible for it with chemicals that I was changing from a boy to a man? I was quite late actually going through puberty. Some kids go through it when they're 12, 13. I think I was quite late. I was 16 before I sort of went through starting facial hair and hair on your body as you go through in puberty. But that did cross my mind, that what I'd witnessed at Midlow Grange Farm with the monk, maybe we've got the ability to, you talk about sort of time slips and things like that. Maybe we have the ability to actually look back at some point in the past. And, that's, however unlikely, it's just as feasible as seeing the spirit of a person who's been dead 300 years. So you can't discount it.
Totally. One more question for you for the cottage, Martin, and I've got a question sitting in the comments for you from Craig. The also true below the cottage was mentioning an old woman who was maybe still under the impression the cottage was hers.
Yes.
Do you think obviously they discovered it was a bakery, and this is just my thinking after I read it. I mean, normally the girl would get pulled out of bed. Is it possible it was the woman that done that, and maybe the woman was the owner of the bakery?
Well,
back in the day, perhaps.
Yeah. You mean their mother had coming back in a previous? Is that what you're saying? That she was actually someone who lived there 100? Yeah. I mean, it's just as possible, I suppose, as saying that it was the spirit of a dead woman who wasn't known to any of them. The fact that activity continued after this woman, who was the psychic who first reported it, and it got into the newspapers in the 70s. When I went in there, it was 2015. There was a woman living there then, single mother with 3 daughters living with her. So I don't know. The woman who I speak to in the book, Carol, she's still alive. And she was the one who relayed these stories to me. She'd got a photo album, and the newspaper cuttings that you see, she took out of the newspaper at the time in 1976. But her mother was dead. So it was her mother who was the psychic, if you like, who first reported this. And it frightened her children. And she said, Mum used to go and speak to it and say, look, stop this. You're frightening my kids. And she said it did have that effect. It calmed down. So she obviously had some gift. And the fact that this single mother with 3 children who was living in there in 2015 experienced things as well suggests to me that there was something present in that house that had its reason for being there. And another thing that is worth mentioning, if we do take the concept that they are the ghosts of somebody from the past, and there is I sort of firmly believe that generally the people who turn out to be ghosts, when you actually research them, this is not in every case, but I found it quite a lot of cases, they're people who either loved a place or a property almost abnormally. It's just like they've died, but their spirit won't leave that place behind because they loved it so much. And sometimes that cannot be a place, it can be a person. So
Mm-hmm.
you tend to find that, ghosts seem to sometimes be linked with people who died suddenly and unexpectedly. They're on a battlefield, suddenly bullet straight through the head, dead, and their ghost comes back because it's almost as if their body hasn't prepared itself for death,
Aye, to
and so
go.
it's just come really quickly, and it's not in the right place to move on to wherever it goes. Another thing that I've noticed is that if you get an area where somebody has been killed violently and ended their, they've died and it's been unplanned, it's not been a natural death, which you can see coming for a day or two. It's just boom, suddenly the lights go out, and it's like their residual energy, their spirit, their soul stays there. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not always because of the place. I think sometimes if they were particularly in love with a person and they're taken from this earth and that person is still there, they actually don't want their spirit to leave either, because the person they love is still alive there.
Well, yeah, they
So
want to be.
that could be an explanation why a lot of hauntings actually fade out over time. It could be that they're still there because their loved one, who they've probably been married to for 50 years, is still there. And when their loved one passes over as well, the two of them then move on to wherever. But until
Aye,
that second partner moves on, the residual energy from the first one is still there, because she's got that spirit soul in her, loves the person who's still alive so much. That's just a possibility. I mean, we can talk these theories through all night, but I think the
was
important
that?
thing to remember here is there is other explanations for ghosts, like telekinesis, like,
Mm.
do we have as human beings the ability to look back at a point in time and actually see something from the past that was here 300 years ago?
Mm. Craig's got a question for you. Can you talk a lot about start again? Can Mark talk a lot about? So, can Mark talk a little about the Nuns Bridge photo and its circumstances? Sorry, but I got there eventually with that one.
Yeah. Well, the longest story in the book is Hinchinbrook House, which appears on the book's front cover. And right next to Hinchinbrook House is this old medieval bridge, one of Huntingdon Shear's oldest ghost stories. The story was that Hinchinbrook House was once a priory, 12th century priory. It remained a priory until Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries in 1536, and then it became a Tudor country house and was bought by the Cromwell family. But for best part of 300 years, it's a priory, Benedictine priory. Now, the story is that a nun from this priory, and there are documented records from the prioress, I think was a lady called Alice Wilton, that some of her nuns were not the best behaved, let's put it that way, and that this particular nun had had a tryst with either a monk or a man and found herself pregnant, and that she'd brought shame on the priory and the church, and so the prioress had some henchmen murder her and her lover on the bridge. And there's sort of four versions of this story. One is that the famous white lady that appears on the cover of my book, that's predominantly linked to Hinchinbrook, but is seen a matter of 100 to 200 yards from Nuns Bridge. That the nun seen on Nuns Bridge is in fact not a nun; it's this white lady. The other theory is that the nun is sometimes seen with a man, and there's a story that the man was her brother, who she'd brought all this shame on her family by getting pregnant, And so the brother was sympathetic and arranged to meet her on the bridge, and then basically changed his mind and said, "You have brought shame to the family." And he actually drowned her in the Alconbury Brook that's beneath the bridge. The brook itself, apart from winter time when it's in flood, is only probably 2 or 3 foot deep. It is a brook more than, it's called the River Kim. Not the River Kim. What's it called? I can't remember now. Well, Alconbury Brook, it's known as, and because it leads to Alconbury, it's not that far away. And the picture that you, the picture was actually taken by another paranormal research group, and like all pictures, it's inconclusive, but it's interesting because it's taken on the bridge. It appears to be coming over the edge of the bridge. On the particular night in question, Becky told me that it wasn't a cold night where there was fog or mist around. So they didn't think it was mist, but they didn't discount that possibility. They said, you know, we caught this image on film and it appears to be human shaped, slightly, and therefore interesting. But that's all really I can tell you about it. It wasn't taken by myself. It was taken by another paranormal group called Cambridge Supernatural Investigators, or CSI, as they like to call themselves. And Becky actually is highly involved with the Ramsey Royal Museum. So she's been doing the paranormal and is a person that I know and trust. I've got no reason to disbelieve that that photo is not genuine. I don't think that Becky is the type of person that would have the knowledge to manipulate an image like that. It could just be a piece of river mist, that's random river mist that's come up, but it's an interesting photo. It's not in the book, by the way, because the photo came to light after the book came out, but I think I sent you a picture of it, didn't I, Scott?
You did, yeah. I can't. It's here somewhere. I'll get it to you, Craig. Craig's Laura's husband.
Right.
I will get it up to you, buddy. I mean, 2 more locations before I like to cover with you, Mark, before we wind it up, buddy.
Yeah.
The George Hotel is
Yes.
Dick Turpin is associated
Yeah,
with.
I mean, yeah, associated with the George Hotel is right opposite the Lion Hotel in Buckton. Both of them are allegedly haunted. I definitely believe the Lion is. It's one of the few places where I can walk in and I can feel it. I don't consider myself to be psychically sensitive, but that is one of the very few places. Ramsey Royal Museum is another where I can feel it. Now, obviously, if you go into a spooky place, your emotions can play tricks on you and you can naturally feel a little bit spooked. I've been doing this for quite a long time now, so I've been to some really spooky places and I don't have that feeling. But the Lion Hotel, which is opposite the George, is one place where I do. But getting back to the George, Dick Turpin haunts God knows how many pubs and inns from London to York, from London to Edinburgh. Many of the Turpin hauntings I do not believe are true. I believe they are probably folklore. This one is particularly interesting because in the book there is what I call Turpin's bolt hole. If you go upstairs to the upper floor in this old coaching inn, there is like a trapdoor built into the side of the wall that led to the stables. And the legend has it that when Turpin stayed there, if the police or the authorities came, he could go through this trapdoor, access to the stables where his Black Bess was, and ride off. Now, there is definitely a well-documented event of paranormal activity there. There's several events of paranormal activity. Some of it appeared in newspapers, but none of that activity actually gives any indication that the person doing the haunting was Dick Turpin. There's a very famous one, I think, that occurred in the, can't remember the exact date, is in the book, Scott, 70s, 80s, where a businessman was staying in this corridor where this boat hole was, and as he was laying in bed at night, he could hear someone walking up and down the corridor outside his hotel room, bellowing out the words, "Bella, Bella." And so in the end, it was keeping him awake, and he was peed off. So he went and opened his door to sort of have a go at this person. There was nobody there. So he thought, oh, that's a bit strange, because he'd literally heard them walking, and snatched the door open to confront them. Nothing there. So he went back to bed, and he'd been in bed a minute or two, and this Bella, man's voice, deep man's voice, bellowing out this name Bella, started again. So again, he did the same thing, stood behind the door, waited until he could hear the footsteps were fairly close, and snatched the door open. Nobody there. Again, that was documented. It was written in the newspapers. You have to always remember, pubs and hotels love to have a ghost. It's a point of interest. You're walking down the road and there's two pubs, and you say this one's haunted and that one isn't, and you've got even just an inkling of interest in the paranormal, you're naturally going to go in the one that's got a ghost, aren't you? Or allegedly got a ghost. So I believe that a lot of the Turpin haunts, because there's another Turpin haunt in the book at Stilton. This is Stilton, where the famous cheese was first made. That's in Huntingdonshire. And this particular place is called the Bell Inn, and that's also supposed to be haunted. And Turpin is allegedly, when he was on the run, he hid up in this room, and I found evidence in the Huntingdon Library to suggest that that was true. What I couldn't tell from the old records was whether he stayed there for 1 week or 11 weeks. It could have been a one that was sort of written not very well and then crossed out, and then a proper one. So it's 2 ones together to make 11. Or it could have been, oh, I've written 1 week and I've not written it very well, I'll write another one. It was written in sort of very faint sort of pencil even. So, but there is some documented evidence in the archives at Huntingdon Library that Turpin did actually stay at that inn or visited it. But the one in Buckton, I can find no evidence at all to say that Turpin stayed there. But the fact that there's 2 Turpin hauntings in Huntingdonshire, which is a very small place, and I'm sure that there's plenty of people out there listening to me now that know of a local pub, wherever they are, where Turpin is supposed to have stayed, haunts, or was a regular visitor. Because these people, it was in their interest. The pub landlord would say, oh, this Turpin stayed here, because he was such a... I don't know if you ever saw the TV program with Richard O'Sullivan, where he played Dick Turpin, and he was portrayed as a sort of Robin Hood character, a sort of robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. He wasn't like that at all in real life. I think his name was Richard Palmer, and he killed men, women, anybody who got in his way, he would kill. He had no qualms about it. He's buried at York, and I did hear that you can go and see his tombstone in York, that he's not in it. They were so frightened because of his fame that he would be dug up by body snatchers, that they buried him, and that night they removed his body and put it into a quicklime to dissolve it and get rid of it. So there is a theory that if you dug that up, you wouldn't find any skeleton or anything in the actual grave, although it's known that that was his final resting place.
The thing is, sorry, Mark, we go.
Yeah. So, getting back to the Turpin haunt, I explained that story about the Bella, and there's certainly been plenty of poltergeist activity there. But it's a bit like Oliver Cromwell. I think Oliver Cromwell was born in Huntingdonshire, so there are 3 places in the vicinity, a stone's throw of Huntingdon Market Square, that are allegedly haunted by Oliver Cromwell. I investigated all of them in depth. I found evidence of paranormal activity, but nothing that actually concretely attached that activity to Oliver Cromwell. And if you look around the UK, and you can Google this, there's about 15 places in the UK that claim to be haunted by Oliver Cromwell. I actually, because of his origins are here in Huntingdonshire, I actually looked into them, and they're just like I found in Huntingdon on the Market Square. Yes, there is evidence of paranormal activity taking place there. It's been reported for years, but when you actually analyse the activity, there's nothing that links it to Cromwell. I think in many cases, the fact that it's a building or an area where they know a very famous person frequented, then it's their ghost, because they were famous in their day, and it's a great.
That's what I was going to, that's what I wanted to ask you. I mean, do you say Turpin Hortons has been reported, numerous places. Do you say
Yes.
Cromwell as well, meant to haunt numerous places? Same as, like say Anne Boleyn, she's meant to haunt, I think
Yes.
it's 7 or 8 different
Yes.
locations.
Yeah.
Jane Seymour,
Yeah.
and you think, well, why would, take Anne Boleyn, for instance, she's meant to haunt at least 7 different locations, Hever Castle,
Yes.
Tower, Blinking Hall, that kind of
Yeah.
places. Why would she haunt so many places?
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
Turpin.
what they have in common, they have one thing in common. She did frequent them, although Blickling. I
Aye.
went to Blickling not long ago, about 4 months ago. I spent a week in Norfolk, and I actually made a point of going to Blickling, and I interviewed the staff, and the room where she's supposed to be seen is the library, and that was out of bounds, as it happened, because they were doing some work in there, and it wasn't, health and safety didn't pass it for the public to. Normally you can go in there, but she wasn't around. That she was in there was a building there before Blickling Hall, and it was her home. That's where she lived, but she wasn't around when Blickling was built. She died. So she's, again, you could say it's a bit like my house here, where I think if there is something here, and I'm pretty sure there is, then it doesn't belong to this property. My father built this property. We know the whole history. No one's ever died in this house, not this particular house, but we don't know the history of the house that was here before us and what's knocked down for this house to be built. So, if they do haunt a certain area, and that house is now gone and this one is built, then I suppose logically there is an explanation for why they would still be here in this house,
Mhm.
even though they can't have any attachment at all to this house. We know the history right back to 1964 when it was built. My late father built it.
So just
So,
before we go into the last location, as I was just saying, I'll use Anne Boleyn again as an example,
yeah,
although there is many other ones.
yeah.
What's your theory on a certain spirit, like say Anne Boleyn, maybe haunting 7 or 8 different locations? Do you think it's possible? Do you think, they would have a reason to do this? Or, because
I,
obviously,
I, I don't naturally, to answer your question quite bluntly, Scott, I don't know. But I think you often, I've encountered in investigations spirits who we've communicated with, and we ask them, "Are you here all the time?" And they say no, they visit. So it's almost as if they're still alive and they're going back to the places where they were. And to get back to your question about Blickling, they are that all those places where she's supposed to haunt are in fact places where she did go in life.
Mhm.
She never went in Blickling Hall because it wasn't built, but she went in the building where Blickling Hall is, the previous building, because it was on the same site. So um, you getting back to the days of Mr. Akora and Most Haunted, he talked about people coming in visitation. So they weren't here, they weren't grounded in that particular place. So I don't know whether that's just Derek Akora talking, or whether I've heard other um, spirit mediums, psychic mediums say that some spirits don't actually stay in a particular place. Let's look for an anniversary haunting, for instance. There's a couple of anniversary hauntings in my book. They only are supposed to happen on one specific day. So where are they
Mhm.
for the rest of the 364 days of the year? So
Exactly. You've
yeah,
got, like, take Jane Seymour, for instance. Anniversary haunt, she's meant to walk up the Queen's Staircase in
yes,
Hampton Court Palace on the
yeah,
anniversary
with
of
the silver
death.
stick candle in her hand.
Aye.
Yeah,
So
she
where
wears
is
a
she
silver stick.
for the rest of
Yeah.
the year?
Well,
Why is
interesting enough, here in Huntingdonshire, where I am, 2 miles north of me is a place called Buckton Towers, which you've no doubt seen in the book. Catherine of Aragon was kept there for about 10 months. She allegedly is said to haunt there. Uh, it looks like, that's my phone going off, beg your pardon.
Yeah, that's what I was just coming to. That was going to be my last location for you, Buckton Towers, because of
Yes,
the Catherine of Aragon tie.
yes.
That's what I was going to ask you about.
Yeah. Well, getting back to Catherine of Aragon, Catherine of Aragon was Henry VIII's wife.
Hmm.
She was his first wife. She was actually with him for 20 odd years. She was with him for more time than the rest of the other wives put together. And she actually, not a lot of people know this, was actually married to his brother before she
She
married
was.
Henry. Yeah, his brother died of the sweating sickness when she was obviously from Spain, from Aragon, and she was betrothed to his brother, and they played the king and queen of Spain. I think her name was Isabel. They paid quite a dowry for her to marry Henry's older brother, and they married. She was a bit older. I think Henry's brother was about 15 when they married, and she was 16, 17. And within months of them marrying, 3 to 5 months, I think, he died of the sweating sickness, which was a bit like the plague. And so obviously the King of Spain wasn't too happy. He'd spent all this money on a dowry, and the English gentry didn't really want to pay it back either. So she married Henry. She was older than him, and they had what, by and large, was, the fact that they were together for as long as they were, 20 odd years, was a reasonably happy marriage. But obviously, she couldn't give him the son that he craved. She actually
Mhm.
gave birth, I think, to about 5 or 6 kids, and they all didn't survive childbirth or adolescence. There was one exception, which was that they had a daughter called Mary, who later became known as Bloody Mary,
Yeah.
Henry's only surviving child. And anyway, Henry tired of Catherine and wanted a divorce. The country was largely controlled by the Catholic religion and the Pope in Italy. And of course, the Catholics didn't believe in divorce. And so they wouldn't grant Henry a divorce. So he dissolved the monasteries and got rid of, if you like, the Catholic religion and started his own Church of England with himself at the head. So, of course, he
Hmm.
could decide then whether he could have a divorce or not. And
That's it. The easy option, and that's where Wolseley started to get downhill in the eyes of
yes,
the Crown officer because he tried for, I think it was 2 years, to convince the
yes,
Pope to
yeah,
grant the annulment, and the Pope was having none of it, and so
done it.
Wolseley knew it.
No,
That's how Henry got
yeah.
Hampton Palace.
Yeah, well, basically, Catherine of Aragon, Henry got rid of her, and he moved her about a bit, but she ended up at this place called Buckton Towers. She was there for about 10 months. It's not a commonly known fact, but Catherine of Aragon was a very skilled lace maker, and she taught the people of Buckton to make lace, which gave them a trade and a profession, made her enormously popular at Buckton. So much so, I think they still have a lace making club in Buckton to this day,
Hmm.
in her memory. And Henry didn't like the fact that she was so popular. So I believe he sent the Duke of Norfolk and the Duke of Suffolk to evict her and move her 12 miles to the west of me to a place called Kimbolton Castle, which is where she eventually died about 2 years later. And when these Duke of Norfolk and Duke of Suffolk turned up with a small body of men, the villagers from Buckton all grouped up and said, "You're not having her. We love her. You don't want her. We do." And
Hmm.
so they literally had to go back to Henry VIII with their tail between their legs and say, "We weren't allowed to take her." Henry returned with like a small army and moved her to Kimbolton, and she died at Kimbolton on the 7th of January 1536, if my memory serves me right. The cause of her death is still a mystery. She had a very blackened heart, which made people think that she haunts. She was murdered by Henry VIII, poisoned, and it sent her heart black. Other people believe that she had a form of cancer, which is probably the most likely. And other people remember that we were on the brink of the fens here, so we were all underwater basically. Within a few miles of Kimbolton, there was water, so it was
Hmm.
very damp, very cold in the winter. And a lot of people think she just succumbed to the Fenland climate and became ill and never recovered. But she was allegedly supposed to haunt Buckton Towers, where she was for about 10 months. Again, I found plenty of evidence there of paranormal activity, but nothing that categorically linked her to Catherine. Now that's not the case when you go to Kimbolton, because when Henry eventually moved her to Kimbolton, and she more or less stayed in her quarters the whole time. She came out of them purely to use the chapel, to worship in the chapel. Kimbolton Castle is now a public school, and a very expensive public school. There's Arab princes and all sorts of people there, so they're not too keen on this sort of paranormal thing. But Catherine of Aragon's ghost has been seen at Kimbolton Castle. There was a really well documented sighting during the Second World War, because troops were billeted there. She's normally seen from the chest upwards. You don't see her lower half, and this is because over the years the heights of the floor in the castle, her residence area was on the first floor, but the floor levels have changed dramatically over the centuries. The castle there is also supposed to be haunted by a famous judge, and he was the judge who tried Guy Fawkes and also Sir Walter Raleigh, and he's supposed to have murdered his own child. God, his name's gone out of my head now, and I should know this. But yeah, he was a very famous judge, and he allegedly, in a fit of rage, threw one of his own children from one of the top floor windows onto the concrete, the central part of Kimbolton Castle, and the baby was killed. And that baby is supposed to haunt there. And on the anniversary of the haunting, the stone where the child allegedly perished is supposed to glow red or blue, depending what account you read. What I was unable to find out when I researched that was the actual date, because it's an anniversary haunting. It only happens once a year, but it obviously hasn't happened in recent years because no one could find any documentation of the date. Like with these other hauntings, we know that the Alconbury disaster one, we know the date, May the 27th. This is one where we didn't. But yeah, Catherine of Aragon, I even read a report where some people had been in the downstairs area and had looked up at the ceiling and had seen her legs. So if you were upstairs, you'd see the top half of her, because of the differences in the floor levels over the years. But someone had actually seen her legs only from the lower level. So weird. I guess if you do see her upper level, if you were downstairs, you would see her lower level, because she'd be walking on a floor that no longer existed. Obviously, the floor levels have been raised. No,
that's true. That'd be weird seeing that. But Kathy's saying at the same time, Sister Margaret was asking the Pope for a divorce, but they couldn't say no to one and not the other, so she turned a cannon on him. I think that was the Stirling Castle. She's right, Kathy. I never knew. I mean, we've done a lot with the Tudors, and we're big Tudor fans and what have you. I never knew that bit, but that's that, Kathy. No, that's new info for me.
Yeah,
anyway.
Obviously, I'm a paranormal investigator primarily, and I made this promise to my aunt to write this book. And obviously, to write the book properly, you cannot rely on the internet. So you have to go to libraries and dig into archives and stuff like that to satisfy yourself that you've got it right. And then all this Tudor history. I mean, I got an A-level in history at school. I did the First World War for my A-level history, so I know the First World War. But the Tudor history and that was fairly new. So because it was Catherine of Aragon's ghost, I wanted to learn as much as I could about Catherine. And so quite interestingly, one of the things I learned, which I didn't ever know, sometimes you'll see Catherine spelt with a K and sometimes with a C. Now, because she comes from Spain, because she's from Spain, both are acceptable. If you read in books, you'll see her name spelled Catherine with a C. On her tomb, which is at Peterborough Cathedral, where she's buried, it's spelt with a K. And I was sort of looked into that, and I found out that when she was alive, people spelt her name with a K and a C. Both were deemed acceptable spellings of the word of the name Catherine, especially if it was a Catherine of Spanish origin. So that was an interesting sort of snippet. Also, as well, something interesting with Catherine, she actually christened herself the Pomegranate Princess. I don't know if people knew this. The pomegranate in Spain was a sign of fertility, oddly enough, which was basically what Henry got rid of her for because she couldn't give him a son. So she actually christened herself the Pomegranate Princess. So At Buckton Towers, where she stayed, there's a very lovely knot garden. There's a picture of it in the book, I believe. And there's one of these sundials in the middle, you know, tells the time by the sun. And around about the time of her death in January, people put pomegranates on there. And if you go to her tomb, if you go to somewhere like Google Images and you put in Catherine of Aragon's tomb, you'll see pictures of her tomb at Peterborough Cathedral, and they have a festival. It's always the last Saturday in January. Whether it's happened in the last 2 years with COVID, I don't know. But the last Saturday, she died on the 7th of January. I do know that, 1536. And on the last Saturday of January, they have a festival to celebrate her life. She was so popular in life. Everybody loved her.
She was. We've done a lot with the Tudors and various ways and what have you. And Catherine was loved by everybody.
Well, if you go, if you ever visit Peterborough Cathedral and visit her tomb, or you look on Google Images and call up pictures of her tomb, you'll find that there's lots of pomegranates all put on the tomb, and that's why she actually christened herself the Pomegranate Princess, because the pomegranate in Spain is a sign of fertility. So there's a snippet of history for you.
A wee snippet of history is always handy, but I think we'll wind it up there for now. Mark, it's been absolutely brilliant. So we look forward to tonight. So that's us for this one, folks. Mark's going to be back every month, and we're going to be talking about different locations from his book, The Haunted History of Huntingdonshire. So we'll be seeing Mark again next month. But thanks very much to everybody in the chat for your questions, your comments as normal. I'll hold on to you just for a wee second or two, Mark. Okay. So that's it for this week. We're live again on Monday with Louise, who's part of Haunted Scotland. But we're going on a wee road trip on Sunday up to, we hope, sunny Loch Ness. We hope it's going to be sunny. We're taking a wee drive up there, so we'll probably be doing a couple of lives in that, weather and signal permitting. But that's it for tonight, folks. So a big thank you to everybody again, and especially to you, Mark. And Mark will be back next month with more locations from his book. But definitely get on to Amazon. Is Amazon, Mark, in it?
Yeah, the book has just actually, the third edition of the book has come out now. It's had its third print run. And on Amazon at the moment, all you can get is the Kindle. But because it's such a big book and the price of posting it around the world is so high, there's been a lot of people saying, can't you get this book on Amazon? So I'm actually looking to do that this month. You can buy the book online from the book's publisher. But as I said, if you live abroad, it's going to cost you quite a bit of money. So it might be worthwhile just to, if you wanted to get the book and you wanted the book rather than the Kindle is available on Amazon. But if you just sort of Google The Haunted History of Huntingdonshire or my name paranormal, you'll find the book, and you can source it from various places online. But it is a big lump of book, and it is quite expensive to post it, unfortunately. But if I can get it on Amazon and people have got Amazon Prime, then obviously the postage cost doesn't come into it. You'll just pay the price of the book. And I'm very hopeful that this month it will be available in a hard copy format. There are hard copies on there. If you look on Amazon, you'll see that there are booksellers who've got hard copies, and they're selling them on there for more than the recommended retail price, because it's a difficult book to get hold of, unless you live here in Huntingdonshire, where it's in most of the local bookshops and things like that. So if you go on there, you'll see people charging. I think the last time I looked, there was about 7 different sellers, nothing to do with me, and they were selling the book for between 30 and 34 quid. Well, it's actually 24.99. So don't be tempted to buy from them. Wait, hopefully in a week or two, and wherever you buy it from, I say to people, don't let them rip you off. Pay 24, pay the retail recommended price that's on the book. Don't pay over the odds for it. If you really want a copy of the book, come to me. You can contact me through one of the Facebook groups or the book's website, and I'll get a book out to you. If it goes out in the UK, I normally give a bit of a discount, or it's normally about a 5-6 quid postage to post it in the UK. first class post. But there are on Amazon, you'll see hard copies of the book and people selling it for as much as £34. They are nothing to do with me, and I don't know why they're allowed to put it on the same page as my Kindle book is, but they are. So Amazon will pay. Obviously, people who are selling on there are paying Amazon to do so, and so it's the Haunted History of Huntingdonshire. The Kindle book is on there, so they put the hard copy with it. But hopefully, when I've got my own hard copy on there for £24.99, these people won't have an interest anymore, because obviously my book, if you're going to buy the book new, you might as well buy it for £24.99 as £34. Yeah,
Exactly.
So, hopefully they'll go away.
It's an absolutely amazing book. So definitely, folks, get in touch with Mark and he'll get you sorted out.
Yeah, I've sent about 200 copies to America, and it's amazed me that people are prepared to pay 19-20 quid postage on top of £24.99. So they're looking at 50 quid for that book, posted to their door. So if I can get it on Amazon, then they'll just pay for the book, and if they've got Amazon Prime, they won't have to worry about postage.
Exactly. So give it a wee look up, folks, as well. It's definitely well worth it. So thanks again, and see, we're back live on Monday night with Lee's for Haunted Scotland. And take care, have a great weekend, folks, and hope the weather's good to you. So talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.